Good evening. Welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're so pleased to welcome Raphael Bob-Waksberg in support of someone who will love you in all your damaged glory. Tonight, he'll be in conversation with Julie Buntin. So Zoom etiquette, you heard me as you came in, but you are muted. You will stay muted, but we ask that you keep your video off while you are in the meeting. We will also have time for Q&A after the conversation. We will do that through the chat function. You can only send messages to me, so you can send any message, any question you might want to ask to me. I'm the only one who will see it, so don't be shy. No one else will see it but me. As another reminder, you can purchase books at our website on the event page that you came here with tonight. I'll also be posting links in the chat. And if you live in Ann Arbor, if you live in Southeast Michigan, as a reminder, you can pick up books from us curbside still. We're not yet ready to open up to the public with our small space, but curbside orders help us a lot, and we've got the staff in there turning them out, putting them outside on the table for you. So as you're book browsing online, just know that some books are available for curbside. In lieu of a purchase, you can also donate $5 to sustain our ongoing event programming. You can think of that as a one-time donation for the whole year, or maybe it's a monthly subscription or access to this event, but anything helps and we appreciate it. Otherwise, we simply thank you for joining the event and participating and being here with us tonight. So without further ado, Raphael Bob-Waksberg is the creator and executive producer of the Netflix series BoJack Horseman. This is his first book. And Julie Buntin is from Northern Michigan. Her debut novel, Marlena, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize, and she teaches creative writing at the University of Michigan. Please join me in using your reaction functions to clap to welcome both of them to your screens.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. So I think we were going to get started with Raphael reading a little bit from his book.
Sure. I'll read something. Hello, Julie.
Hi.
And thank you for having me. And thank you for having me, John Literati. I just said that like that's his name, John Literati. Thank you for having me, Literati. Michigan, it's wonderful to be here. Everyone watching who's not in Michigan, thank you for joining us here. This is a story from my book, Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory. This is actually the first story in the book I'm going to read, which I think is actually a good introduction to the book itself and the way the book works, the themes that I'm exploring in this book of short stories. So you'll see if you can catch on to what those themes are. The date is going well. He's handsome and charming and everything he claimed to be on the website. She likes him, she decides. He's the kind of guy you could introduce to your friends, she decides. After dinner, he invites her back to his place. He opens a bottle of wine and pours her a glass. He also offers her a tall, skinny can with a rubber lid. Salted circus cashew? What's a circus cashew? She asks. Open it up, he says. See for yourself. She looks at the can. The label says, the cashew company's very own, and then in big bold letters, salted circus cashews. And then in smaller letters, tasty, salty. And then in even smaller letters, ingredients, cashews, salt. And then on the side, there's a drawing of a man with a whip, a lion tamer. The whole design of the can is circus themed. And the lion tamer has a speech balloon coming out of his mouth. And inside the speech balloon, it says, hello, friends. Please enjoy these freshly salted circus cashews, courtesy of the Cashew Company. Made with the finest ingredients combined to perfection, this can contains only the best salted circus cashews. There certainly isn't a fake snake wrapped around a spring that will jump out and startle you when you remove the top, if that's what you were thinking. No, perish the thought. Only cashews here. I swear to God, I am being 100% sincere about the cashews. Why would there be a snake in here? That's crazy talk. Look, if you open up this can, and a pretend snake jumps out at you, then you have my permission to never trust me again. But why would you want to miss out on the opportunity to eat delicious salted cashews just because of the slight off chance that this is all an elaborate ruse to make you appear foolish? Okay, I see you are still not opening the can. And I understand that. Maybe you are right to be cautious. You have been lied to before, after all. Your heart is weathered and scarred, mishandled by many, eroded by time. You're no dummy, and yet repeatedly you stumble over the cracks of your cobblestone heart. You let your naked, foolish hopes get the better of you. Perhaps every can of cashews has a fake snake lurking, but you keep opening them, stupidly, because in your heart of hearts, you still believe in cashews. And every time you discover the cruel fiction of the cashew can, you swear to yourself, you'll trust a little less next time. You'll be a little less open, a little more hard. It's not worth it, you say. It just isn't worth it. You're smarter than all that. From now on, you're going to be smarter. Well, I'm here to tell you that this time will be different, even though I have absolutely no evidence to support that claim. Open this can and everything will be okay. The salted circus cashews are waiting. They are so savory and delicious. You will be so glad you put your faith in me. This time is different. I promise you it's different. Why would I lie to you? Why would I want to hurt you? This time, there is no snake waiting. This time, things are going to be wonderful.
Yay! Thank you so much, Raphael.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
Thank you.
It was great to hear the opening of the book, the first story in the collection. So I wanted to start by asking you a question that's sort of personal. But this book, as everyone heard from what Raphael read, if you haven't read it, now you know that it is a book that is about, in many ways, searching for someone to love you in all your damaged glory, which is also the title. It's also a phrase that's used as a pickup line in another story. So I couldn't help but think, and having known you many, many years ago, I thought maybe you would have a story about a sort of disastrous date, or like, what's the worst date you've ever been on? And maybe, and to pin onto that question, how did if you feel comfortable kind of going into this space, how did your romantic missteps and foibles and adventures inform this book at all?
That's a great question. There are many parts to that. When you say worst date, there are a handful of dates that jump to mind immediately. I think I'll maybe go over two of them that really stand out. One, which is, I don't know if you could even call it a date, but I got a text message from a girl that I was seeing, and she wanted to meet for like a coffee. This is like after like icing me out for like a couple weeks. So like I kind of knew what this was going to be, right? Actually what happened was I bought theater tickets for us. And then things kind of fell apart, and then we didn't talk for a while, but there was still this like date on the calendar that was looming. And it was like, and like neither of us were like reaching out to the other one. So, and eventually she was like, I think it was like the day before, I was like, are we still going to the theater? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. Like, do you still want to go with me? And she said, yes. I said, okay, well, do you want to like get dinner beforehand? She said, I can't, I have another thing, but I'll meet you at the theater. And so she met me like right before the play started.
Oh no.
And then at intermission, she like raced to the bathroom. And then right after the play was over, she's like, I have to go. And she left. And so then I was like, what's going on, man? And she's like, let's get together to talk. So I knew what this was, but I was like, let's get lunch. Because I'm hungry. So we went to get lunch, and then I think it was brunch, because I ordered waffles, which might have been lunch, because I enjoy waffles when I can get them. So I put my order in, and I was like, what is this? And she's like, it's over. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then I guess I thought there'd be more to talk about, but there wasn't. And then my waffles came, and then she had to like wait. She didn't order anything. She ordered like coffee. So then she had to wait while I ate my waffles. Like neither of us could think of anything else to say. I was like, I thought I'd be like, why? What did I do wrong? Is there any chance? I was like, no, there's nothing. There's nothing to say. And so we just sat there while I ate my waffles, and we couldn't even think of small talk. It was like, I should have even said, like, what did you think of the play last night? Because I didn't get to talk to you about it, but I didn't even think of that. So that was a really bad one.
Well, you can see how that speaks to this. You have a story in this collection that is just a list of the horrible lunches you can have with an ex, and it really is.
Yes.
It's a pretty comprehensive.
Yes. So I think, one, which actually is not included in the story, is the one where there's literally nothing to say to each other, and you thought you should have this lunch, but there's just like nothing.
Obligatory lunch of silence.
Yeah. Another bad date for which I blame myself was there was a woman that I was interested in that I don't remember if we'd been on any dates. We maybe been on like one or two, and it certainly wasn't progressing in any real way, but it wasn't like not progressing either. It's kind of like, all right, we've been on a couple dates. What do we think of each other? I don't know. So then I asked her out again, and she said, my evenings are kind of busy, but maybe we could do a lunch. And this should have been like, again, I'm like, no, that's the opposite direction of where I want to be going in. So I tried to negotiate with her, and I was like, okay, what if instead of a lunch, we did like a breakfast, like a really early breakfast? Because I thought that's like closer to nighttime, so it feels a little more intimate.
Yeah, that weirdly makes sense, but once you're in the
call it a
negotiation
date. The writing was on the wall, but so I was like, this would be really cute. We'll go like right when the restaurant opens at like 7 a.m. We'll wear our pajamas and we'll order breakfast food. So I wore my pajamas. I think she did not show up in pajamas. And we were both like really tired. It was like very early for us, and we had full days of work ahead of us. And we were just like, what are you doing? Okay. And that was our last date. I didn't see her again after that. Those are my two worst dates.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good.
Those are good stories. I could use them. I could have put them in here next time, the next collection.
It's interesting how they both kind of circle around something that comes up again and again in these stories, which is like the struggle between expectation and reality, or like intention and like, plans well laid that completely fall apart when presented with two people who can't connect in a moment. How much do you think about that about this idea of like expectation versus reality when you're writing a story, or do you just come at these from a totally different?
Well, what's so fun about fiction is the reality can be whatever you want it.
Yeah.
Right. So in some ways you can be more romantic in fiction. Things can work out the way you want them to. And I think, we've all been lied to by fiction in the past. But there are things you see in movies or read in books that feel very romantic. And then if you try to do something like that in real life, it's super creepy, or you're a stalker, or like it comes off like half-assed. It's like not cute, and you can't do it. But in a book, you can do whatever you want. And maybe I should have utilized that more to make more romantic things happen. But instead, I kind of leaned into like, well, what's the biggest disaster that can happen?
Yeah. What's like the worst?
What's the cringier, less romantic version of this? Because that's also how things like to play out in my mind, right? You can kind of imagine all the ways things can go right, but you can also imagine all the ways things will go wrong. And then sometimes it's fun to get those down on paper, and then you've excised them. You don't have to think about them anymore. They can't haunt you.
Does it really work like that? I mean, once you've done that, have you actually excised them?
In some ways, I think. I mean, I do actually. Like, I think that, a lot of my work delves into like uncomfortable places and situations and characteristics. And I do feel like some of that is like me kind of cleaning the gunk out of my own system, and I think there are, sometimes it was actually really helpful for me as a writer, going back a ways, to like discover the art of fiction. Because I used to, when I was a kid, I would come up with like a clever or outrageous thing to say, and then I would say it, regardless of whether it was like appropriate or like thoughtful or kind. Like I definitely hurt a lot of my friends because I on TV, Chandler can say something mean to Joey and everyone laughs it off and they're still friends. In real life, if you come up with like a perfect jab at your friend and then you say it, it really hurts their feelings. It doesn't matter how cleverly constructed it was, but it would kill me if I could come up with like a clever thing and I couldn't say it. So once I discovered, I can write it down and make a character say it in fiction, that like freed me to be kinder to the people in my life and not have to say the mean thing or the hurtful thing out loud or the disruptive thing.
That's so useful. That's like so much more useful personally than fiction can be sometimes.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that there are certain writers, and I'm thinking specifically of television writers who also are actors who like have a persona, and sometimes that persona bleeds into who they actually are. And I think that's very dangerous. Or they'll tweet something kind of in their voice, but the context of Twitter is very different than the context of their character on a TV show, and they don't have control over that. So something I try to be aware of in my writing is who is saying this? Is it me, or is it the character of my Twitter account, or is it a character on my show or in one of my stories? What is the takeaway from this? How are people going to read it? And it's something to be thoughtful about.
Yeah. That kind of connects to a question I had about how you kind of come. So a lot of these stories are kind of like premise forward stories, I would say. Like they might adopt a sort of formal premise, like they're like a hallmarky poem or a list of something or the rules of a game or a misconnections post, or they're like more high concept premise type things, like a story from the point of view of a dog or the drunk superheroes story. I guess I'm curious, like how do you come at the story sort of premise first? And if you do that, how do you make sure that how do you work against making the story just the premise? Like, it has to transcend its premise. We talk about that a lot in workshops. How do you navigate that?
I've never taken a fiction workshop. I don't know what people talk about. That's good to know.
Talk about that.
That's a good freebie.
Fiction workshop, yeah.
All right, I got to keep pumping you for more info, so I don't have to take one. I'll just like, what are the other things we talk about in fiction workshops? Well, I always feel like, and you can fancy this up with your fiction workshop language. But I always feel like in my stories, particularly the stories in this book, and as I'm writing them, I feel like there's two hooks to them, and the first hook, which is the thing that usually gets me interested in, is what is that gimmick or that format or that strong voice that's going to kind of grab me and pull me into the story, and then I think you need to have the second hook, which is what is the story actually about? And what the story is actually about has to justify this premise that you are doing, this voice, this format. And then I think, one thing that I struggled with for a while is this idea of form being justified by function. I think is a really important thing in fiction. And I think sometimes as a writer, that makes you think, okay, well then I need to come up with the story first, and then I'll figure out the format that I'm going to tell it in.
Right.
And I think that can be limiting sometimes. Because I actually work the opposite. I think, no, you can come up with the fun part first, then come up with the thing that's going to justify the fun part. Like you don't have to. I think it gets confused. I mean, at least for me, it did for a while. This feeling of like, I have this fun thing I want to do, but it doesn't come from a story, so it's not legitimate. And I didn't realize until much, much later that you can make it legitimate after the fact. You can come up with a story that's going to justify it.
Yeah, well, and sometimes too, the fact that some of those choices might come with their own sets of constraints can actually unlock your imagination.
Definitely.
You to unexpected places in the work, like. How do you violate the form? Like, how do you start with the misconnection? Just keep using that example, and then take it as far as it can possibly go in its essential misconnection-ness. you know?
Exactly. And that also, it allows you to ask questions of yourself, which is very helpful for writing, right? Like, who is this person talking this way? Why do they have to talk this way? What does this say about this person? What is the escalation of this idea?
Yeah.
How can I continue to surprise myself with within these constraints, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I like that you said escalation. I mean, I think another thing that is interesting about these stories is that pretty much all of them operate to using this like principle of like continuous escalation, like escalation past the point at which you might imagine that the top has been reached. Like then they go like in We Men of Science. Well, maybe this is a spoiler. I'm not going to say this, but there's
the cashew story.
Or in the cashew
story. A
story.
great example of that, right?
Yeah,
well,
exactly. Like it's this speech bubble, and then you think like, is this going to end?
How long is this speech? How big is this can that he's reading?
Yeah, and then it becomes something like totally surreal and absurd, and a commentary on the sort of like larger structure of the story. But I guess we're kind of circling this, but I'm really interested in that. Like,
can I interrupt one thing very quickly, just about the speech bubble specifically? Is I very intentionally, in the formatting of that story, I didn't put quotation marks in because I didn't want the quotation to end. I didn't want it to end with like a close. I wanted it to end kind of like open it, like maybe it keeps going. Like you don't know. So I'm sorry, but what were you going to say?
I mean, even that though, that in of itself is also an escalation, right? It's like it's again like keeping like turning it up and turning it up and turning it up and kind of seeing like how far you can take it. But it's how do you know when you've I mean, I guess this is a hard question to answer, but like, how do you know when you've pushed it far enough? Like, is it just an intuition, or do you think like, have I run through all the possible swerves the story can take? Like, do you keep sort of testing the premise to see what else falls out, or?
That's a great question. I mean, I think also part of it is finding how long you want the story to be, right? And so like, the longer the story is, the more you need to continue to churn and make sure you're still telling story and not just kind of plateauing on a thing, right? So some of these stories are very short.
Yeah.
And there's just like one or two turns. It's like, here's the gimmick, here's what the story is, the story's over, right? And then some are like more what you would kind of more traditionally consider short stories in a collection of short stories, where there's like an arc and a beginning, middle, and end. And then it is about, am I still interested? And you know, you're trying to put your head in the head of a reader. Am I still engaged? What do I need to do to kind of keep things interesting, to keep it moving? I mean, I do feel, I've said this a lot in interviews, very lucky that I think my experience in television has really kind of sharpened my cravings for incident in stories. And so I want stuff happening. You know, I want to make sure things are moving, characters are changing. I want to feel like at the end of the story, we're in a different place emotionally than we were at the beginning of the story. Yeah. And that happened because of something that happened in the story, not just because we were sitting there reading a book and then we got hungry.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Sometimes in fiction workshops, sometimes we talk about like what is made visible at the end of the story that wasn't visible at the beginning. Like what is the thing? It doesn't necessarily have to be a sort of traditional, like here's the thing, but it's something that you couldn't see before, and then suddenly you can kind of see it. I feel like a lot of your stories work like that in a really like beautiful and surprising way.
That's I like that, what is made visible, because I often think about my stories as like, what is the change in the story? And I think often it is a change that the characters go through, but I think and that's mostly true in like television, definitely. But I think in prose fiction, it's just as likely to be maybe the characters don't change, but the reader's understanding of the situation changes because, like you said, what has been made visible.
Right. Something about the conditions of the story have made this new thing like possible. You mentioned TV, and I'm curious. So like when I knew you in college, you were in a sketch comedy group called Old English, right?
Yeah.
Am I remembering that? Is that right?
That's 100% correct. Yeah.
And I remember at the time really thinking of you as like a playwright and like a comic, and maybe I knew, I can't really remember, but I remember just thinking that playwriting was kind of like where you were going in your career. And I'm really curious about how that's influenced you, that your work in theater has influenced you as a writer of fiction, maybe even your work in TV, but especially the collaborative aspect of that, because writing fiction is so private, really, at least before it's published.
It's interesting, yeah, because we knew each other. We were both living in New York, and at that time in my life, I really didn't know what I was. I mean, I was kind of trying to write plays and doing comedy and acting in plays and kind of bouncing around. It was really only when I moved to LA that I kind of, funneled myself into the field of TV writing. And so I'm excited that now I have this book and now I can maybe expand out and do some other things again. But what did I learn? I mean, playwriting is like where I learned to be a writer, but at the same time, my comedy group too is where I learned to be a writer. Yeah. And also I would say, I've said this before a lot too, I had a blog, and my blog is where I learned to be a writer. And so all these different disciplines kind of combined to make me the writer that I am now. I remember in college, I majored in playwriting, and I was also in a comedy group, and I was a real snob about the distinction between plays and sketch comedy. And I remember there were certain playwrights who, I can name them because they're very successful and I don't actually wish them any ill will, like Christopher Durang or David Ives, who I now have an appreciation for. But I was in college, I really felt like what they were doing was writing sketch comedy and calling it plays. And that felt like inappropriate to me. I felt like plays are serious. And like I said, and there's a change, right? There's a beginning, middle, and end. The characters go through some sort of adjustment. Actually, both David Ives and Christopher Durang have written longer, more serious plays in addition to their short comedic stuff. But I felt like sketch comedy is not serious. Sketch comedy is about, you have to make people laugh. And if they go, oh, that's interesting, then you failed, right? And so there was a real distinction between like my serious writing, which had jokes in it, but was like focused on like being real and making you feel emotions, and then my comedy writing. And it was really only as I started developing television, and I guess you could say We Men of Science mixes those things together a little bit, right? So We Men of Science was one of the earliest stories in this book, and Julie and I have a history about that story specifically, which we can talk about. But for me, the winning combination was when I actually decided to combine those things and kind of got rid of this distinction in my brain of like my serious work and my like fun mess around comedy stuff. And when I started to feel like, what if something was really funny and also really made you feel things? Can those things mix together? And that's kind of been the magic for me.
Yeah. Are you a George Saunders fan? Have you read his short fiction?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He talks about that a lot in his sort of like coming kind of a breakthrough in his own work of deciding like, look, I had all of these ideas about what serious literary fiction would look like and feel like, and it wasn't until I sort of violated my own belief system and pushed myself into like making things that would make people laugh or, that were fun, that suddenly he was able to like be his George Saunders.
And that was, I mean, for me, the fun part of this, writing this book of short stories was feeling like, could this be a story?
Yeah.
Could this be a story? Like, oh, this is an interesting little riff I had, but it couldn't be a story. But what if it was? what if I made it a story? Let's be bad. Let's turn this into a story.
I feel like so you mentioned We Men of Science, and so We Men of Science, I was in college, it was 2009 when I published. You have it in the acknowledge. It was 2009, I guess, when you the version that we published in my college literary magazine.
Well, I to be clear, I wrote it for you.
You wrote it for us. Oh yeah.
Well, I had this idea that I was playing around with. So this is our mutual friend Dan Moyer had written a play called Alligator, which I went to go see, which was about an opposite universe. And I saw his play, and then that week I was really excited, and I emailed Dan. I said, Dan, I have this weird idea for something. Tell me if this makes sense. It's about an opposite universe. And to Dan's credit, he didn't say, did you just see my play and want to do your own version? He was like, yeah, man, that sounds cool. You should do something with that. So I had this idea of this anti-door, like a door that you would walk through that would take you to the opposite universe. And then the twist being that what an opposite universe is somewhat fluid, that you don't know where you're going to go when you walk through the door, and that you might think that the opposite is the opposite, but actually every time you walk through that door, things move and shift. And so I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this idea. And there was one guy who, I don't know how I found him, like a friend of a friend, who was like he was really excited about this like pamphlet project he wanted to do of like, we're gonna make pamphlets. The future of literature is pamphlets. If you got pamphlet ideas, pitch them to me. And so I was like, all right. So I was like, okay, it's a pamphlet about this new product, the Anti-Door. It's like gonna advertise this thing. And he was like, that sounds great, do it. And then I was like, immediately hit with writer's block. I was like, how do I make a pamphlet? What is a pamphlet? It's got to be like 6 pages that you fold over. What do I do? And so then I just like didn't email him for like 6 months. And eventually he was like, you're not writing that pamphlet, are you? I was like, no, I don't think I can. He's like, that's cool. Nobody else did. So then you reached out and you were like, I'm putting together this literary journal. Do you have anything that I could include? And so then I was like, I sure do. It's on my computer. Now, let me go get it. And then I was like, I gotta make this into something. So then I spent like a week like writing like crazy, and I made it into the story that you then published. And then like 6 years later, you emailed me again and you said, I'm working at a new literary, like a real thing.
Let's just republish that.
Well, I think you said I think I might have sent you a few things. I think I sent you like a couple other stories.
Yeah, I remember.
Things that I were working on. I think you're like, my favorite is still We Men of Science. And I changed it. I'd edited it a little bit. I cleaned it up. Yeah. And so the one that's on the website is different than the one that was in the original literary journal. And the one that's in the book is still a third, because I worked on it some more. And so it's really, I don't know if you've ever compared and contrasted, Julie, but I think it's an interesting kind of marker of my development as a writer and the things that I'm interested in exploring, the differences in those stories.
You know, it's funny, like I didn't remember, maybe you told me that at the time that you wrote it for What You Do Eat a Peach, but I remember just that I couldn't believe we were getting a story from you, because I already felt at that time that you were like a celebrity. It was like, we're getting a story from Raphael Bob-Waksberg. Our magazine is set, you guys. Like we're set. I remember so I think part of me couldn't like compute that maybe you like rushed maybe you told me that, but I just was like, it must be this perfect gem that Raphael has like sitting around in his, in his story pile, like ready to go for us. But I remember thinking that it would, like talking to you about it when we republished it on Catapult, and thinking just how interesting it is to kind of like, and I think for the writers who are here listening, like when you write a story and then you write a draft and then some years go by and you revisit the draft and then it makes it into your first book, like there's an evolution that can go into these stories, and you can make something like much, much better and much richer over time. Your stories can have like a long life in that way.
And also, not to pump up your head too much, but like that was kind of the beginning of this book. So I had written We Men of Science, and it got published in a thing. I was like, all right, well, what else? What am I going to do with this? Like now I have a short story, and then I thought maybe if I write a couple other ones, then I can like put together. I was thinking like a zine or something for myself. Like I can like self-publish something. And so then I wrote Up and Comers, and I wrote These Are Facts, which are the two other kind of big stories in the book, which also went through a lot of changes by the time they actually got published in this book. So then I had 3 stories, and then I started collecting other smaller things I'd written here and there, like on my blog and things. And I was like, oh, I think this could be something. And that's when I started talking to Knopf about actually making a book out of it. But it was all because I had this one story that I didn't know what to do with.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, the story is. I remember both times when I got it when I was a college student, and then when I got it again as like an adult human being, being like, this fucking story is so good. And I think one thing that continues to sort of like hit me in the gut about the story is, well, this is all your work to an extent, I feel like has this amazing like calibration of like the right amount of funny and sad that like hit each other in just such a specific way that you feel both like you want to laugh and cry at the same time. Like it seems like such a signature quality of your work. But there's this part in We Men of Science where Yoni Beckerman thinks, after he's kind of going back and forth between these two worlds, this opposite world and his real world. I'm just going to read it because I'm curious if you think about this now. Perhaps a better me would have done the right thing and left, or a worse me wouldn't have worried about it, just indulged in the transgression. But I am only as good as I am, and I could only do what the person as good as I am could do. This idea of like being the person, being only as good as you are, and only being able to do what a person as good as you are can do also seems to me to be a real theme in this collection. And not to push you towards like talking about way heavier stuff right now, but this idea of like being only as good as you can be and doing only as good as you can do in our current moment is an interesting thing to think about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll say, you know, well, maybe not as obvious as BoJack Horseman, Yoni Beckerman is not a role model. And in fact, you know, if as you read the story, you know, he's not a guy who always makes the right decisions. And I think that kind of thinking is actually very limiting.
Yeah.
And there's you know, I think there's like a pretty thought around it. Actually, something I think about a lot too is like the danger of good writing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you can make a very pretty convincing argument that is not actually true. And so I would hope that as people read my stories, these are things to think about, and they're things to you know, kind of take in mind as this is what this character is feeling right now, but they're not universal truths. Yeah. And that I think, you know, a lot of the problems in the world right now stem from a complacency of, you know, what can I do? How can I help? I should just go about my life. And I think one thing that we've seen in the last, you know, few months with the coronavirus, and now in the last few weeks with this, you know, uprising of protests and people talking about Black Lives Matter and police violence, is a reminder that nothing is set in stone and we can do a lot. And that sometimes our biggest impediment is our own desire not to act or other people's desire not to act. You know, not to say, you know, because there are a lot of people who are demanding change and are, you know, all on themselves to be better, and the biggest obstacle blocking them is other people not willing to make those changes or afraid of those changes. And so I think it is important for all of us to challenge ourselves when we start to think like, well, yeah, I can only do what I can do, and I'm no better, you know, that's who I am. I think conversely, I think we have to be aware of our own mental health, and we have to not beat ourselves up for not being better than who we are, and understand that we can't always live up to our own expectations, and be able to forgive ourselves and try to be better. Because I think that's dangerous too. I can paralyze you too if you feel like there's so many things I need to do. There's so many places I need to give money to. There's so many Congress people I need to call. I can't do it all. I'm a failure. And you can paralyze yourself and curl up into a little ball and just play Sudoku all day, you know? And so I think it's important to remember that we can all be a little bit better, and also that none of us is perfect nor are striving to be perfect. And so if you can't be perfect, that's not a good excuse for not trying to be better.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that the story, like reading the story now, I feel like it actually invites these questions. Like it invites you to critique Yoni's behavior and the ways in which he gives himself these sort of like cop-outs. And I don't know, again, it's like one of those stories I feel like every time you kind of come up against it, it has something else to tell you.
Yeah, one thing I'm really interested in, and I think We Men of Science is a good example of it, is like we as humans, our abilities to rationalize our own behavior to ourselves, and that there are things that we know in our brain to be wrong, and then we do them and they don't feel wrong, and we convince ourselves because they didn't feel wrong, therefore they're not wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like our gut kind of goes against our brain because our gut wants what our gut wants.
Yeah.
And so I think it is difficult sometimes to take a step back and go, okay, if I saw someone else doing this, if this wasn't me, how would I judge that other person? And then I think our initial instinct is like, well, those people on the outside are wrong because they don't know what I'm going through. They don't know how this is good for me or this is good for that other person. And I think it is a constant struggle to remind ourselves, no, we are, you know, let's pretend we're not the protagonist of this story. What are we actually doing, and how can we be doing better?
Yeah. I think one, maybe kind of along these lines, we talked about this a little bit before we turned on the video and this was an event, but I'm curious, like, I saw, and maybe I'll reframe this question a little bit, because I saw, for example, that you very generously contributed to the conversation on Twitter about publishing paid me, and sort of the inequality that we're seeing in the industry, particularly in how Black writers are paid and opportunities that they're able to have in this, in both publishing and in TV. And I'm curious, how are you thinking about, are there places that you're donating money right now? How are you kind of getting involved in being part of this sort of collective uprising that will hopefully lead to real change?
Well, I'm donating money as much as I can. Every day on Twitter, I feel like there's a new link to something of this person needs money, this organization needs money, and I'm trying to give. Particularly in the last couple of days, because it is Pride and because of J.K. Rowling's recent statements, I feel like it is really important to kind of shine a light on the trials and tribulations of trans men and women. And particularly Black trans women. Vice recently posted a list of a whole list of great places to donate to support them, which I would encourage people to check out. I also finally set up a recurring donation to the organization Black Lives Matter, because they've been having this conversation for years, and right now a lot more people are having a conversation, but they've been doing the work, and they've been pushing this and fighting for this, and so I think they've been doing great work, and I want them to continue to be leaders in this, and so I thought that was important that I do that as well. And then also I'm getting more invested in what's happening locally. I think especially in liberal progressive circles, it can become very attractive to just blame everything on the president or the Senate, and say, well, if we didn't have those bums in office, then, we could finally get some stuff done. But the truth is, we have a lot of, very progressive people running some very progressive cities with some very non-progressive policies, especially as it relates to the police. So I've been very focused on what here in LA, Eric Garcetti is doing, what our city council is doing, what our local police department is doing. And then also I live in Santa Monica, so I'm looking what is Santa Monica doing? And I just found out who the mayor of Santa Monica is for the first time. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking very closely at them, and when they're up for election, I'm gonna take it a lot more seriously than I have in the past, and I'm gonna make my voice heard. So I would say, especially for people who do feel like things are hopeless, who feel like things are so bad, I would look locally and think, what can you do in your community? Because you have a much larger voice in your local community than you do on a national level, and there's a lot that can be done.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of good advice in there about how to sort of make a difference in your community and more broadly. And also, just in case people are missing it, it looks like Literati threw the links to the organizations that the Vice List and Black Lives Matter in the chat. I want to make sure we have enough time for audience questions, but before we move to that portion of the conversation, I am really curious. I'm sure you have TV stuff galore that you're working on, but I'm really curious about what fiction you're writing now, if you're writing fiction. I'm
having a hard time writing anything right now. Within the self-quarantine kind of mode that we're in, and I feel like I should be used to it by now, but it's really it's been difficult for me to get into a writing routine. And part of that is because I have other projects that I'm developing and working on, so there's always distractions. But I find I write my best when I'm in a cafe, where people are looking at me and judging me, and I paid for coffee, so I feel bad if I don't write anything. And also I don't know the Wi-Fi password, so I can't possibly get distracted. And in my home, there's always a million distractions. There's a lot to do, but I've been percolating, which is nice. Yeah. I feel like for the last 3 to 5 years, I've been working very hard on a million different projects, my shows and this book, and trying to get it all done. And so it's been nice in the last few months to just collect thoughts and just put something down, in a document of a little line here, a little line there, and not necessarily, doing the work of making it into a thing, but just letting things kind of accumulate has been enjoyable for me.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you been writing? Are you able to write in this time?
I have been. I have been. Yeah, it's been hard. It hasn't always been easy, and I think this week was a hard one. I think just with everything that's going on. But I have been. But I think part of that is just my circumstances have changed, in that I am a teacher now full time, and that means my summer looks really different than it ever did when I worked at Catapult. So it's just I am on a deadline. So
is it hard to write as a teacher? Because I think teaching is such a creatively exhausting thing in itself. I mean, and a wonderful thing. But because I remember I did a little bit of teaching, playwriting workshops, and when I did, I was like, oh, this is. I mean, obviously it's a full-time job, but I thought, and I'm going to write my own stuff at night. I'm like, no, I'm writing syllabus, and I'm writing like lesson plans.
Yeah, I see at least one of my students is here.
Oh, okay, don't talk shit then.
I'm not just saying this because one of them is here. The students that I'm working with here are so talented that actually just being around their imaginations is like plugging yourself into like an energy source. It's like
sap that energy. Take it.
A little. I mean, when you're around people who are like constantly thinking about how to make their work better. I mean, I imagine maybe in some way there's some relationship between the way it feels, even though we're not doing this kind of work collaboratively, and workshop has that spirit sometimes, but like a writer's room where you're like brains are firing against a lot of people's brains at once. And I hate collaborating in my own work, but like I like to be around other people who are like thinking deeply about art. So in that sense, it's kind of been wonderful. I have no complaints about like the kind of combination of teaching and writing. I feel it is a much healthier combination than like teaching and editing in some ways.
And what are you working on? Are you working on a novel?
Raphael, this is your interview.
Well, I want to know. I'm curious. Can I shout out your book while we're talking?
Yeah, sure.
This is Marlena. This is an old cover. This is if you're here for me and you're not Julie's student and don't know who Julie is, I want to recommend her novel, Marlena. It's heartbreaking and beautiful and tender. And this was an advanced reader's copy I got, but it's not what the actual book looks like. Why did you change the cover, Julie?
Barnes and Noble said they wouldn't, they picked me for something, and they said they wouldn't pick me if my cover wasn't better. My publisher changed the cover.
That's wild.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble apparently has a lot of clout. Barnes and Noble doesn't like your cover, your publisher will jump. Can you show your book again? Can you talk quickly, and then we'll make sure, John, how are we doing with the audience questions? We probably have some built up. Let's just hear about a little bit about both those covers, and then we can.
Yep. We've got a few, but go ahead.
Okay, this is the hardcover. This is the paperback. I believe both are currently available at Literati. And I would imagine there's a link where people can order them if they would like to. So this, I'm delighted by both of these covers. And I like that they kind of work in conversation with each other. I like that the handwriting kind of carries over. The pink, I think you kind of go, okay, yeah, it's the pink book. That makes me smile. We looked at a bunch of different options, I remember. And I felt like this one did the most to kind of capture, I feel, the mood of the book, which is like kind of playful and fun. And I feel like this really grabs your attention. I really love the spine of the hardcover too, which has the title kind of going down with all these little centipede hands. But I feel like this also is an evocative picture of a broken egg with a little Band-Aid over it, as if that makes everything better. Which is, what are we if not all eggs that have been fragile little eggs that have been damaged and just slightly bandaged over our damage.
Oozing a little bit.
So I'm very happy with the what?
I said just oozing like a little bit.
a little bit of yolk just dripping out of our side, but we're still here. Gosh darn it, and we're gonna try our best. This is George Washington. He could not tell a lie. That would have been a good blurb. I cannot tell a lie. This book is great. George Washington.
Thanks, Raphael. I think, John, maybe we should move just for the sake of time to the audience.
Yes, we've got a few questions. You covered one of them, but I'm going to kind of elaborate on it because I think you're both being necessarily and understandably as creatives a bit coy, but this question gets more into the heart of it, which is, oh, and I've lost it. Nope, here we go. What projects do you have coming up next? So of the projects you're talking about and working on, are there any that you're willing to name and tell people when they can expect them, whether they are books or other things?
Julie, would you like to go first?
I think that's a question for you.
Well, I want.
No, it's for both of you. It was for both. It was for both of you.
It was explicitly for both of us. Because you said you're working on something. You want to tell us?
I haven't.
Okay, clearly you don't want to.
Well, I just
ventured into a territory
about my next book that has not been made public yet, but is also not a secret. So it's just complicated. It's just like a complicated space to write.
You're working on a book. Can I ask yes or no questions? Can I try to?
Yeah, sure.
Is it fiction? Is it fiction?
Yes.
Is it a novel?
Yes.
Short fiction. It's a novel.
It's a novel.
Is it realistic fiction?
Yes.
Are there magical elements?
No. You pretty much described it.
All right, we're done. I have, like I said, I've been percolating. I have a handful of ideas that I don't know if they're stories for my next book or if they're TV shows or movies or plays. I'm still kind of working on them. And then meanwhile, I'm producing season 2 of Undone on Amazon. And if you've never seen season 1 of Undone, you should check that out. And I'm working on season 2 of Tuca and Birdie on Adult Swim. And the first season of that is on Netflix. You should check that out as well. But yeah, those are kind of what I'm working on at the current moment. And we'll see what's next for me. I've been enjoying not rushing from thing to thing at the moment, because as I said, I did a lot of that for a while, so I'm in no hurry, and I feel like I'm going to let the ideas come to me, and then when a thing is ready, I will put it out to the world.
There is a question from a guest about who just watched all of Undone a few weeks ago and loved it. And
Great.
They're wondering if you could talk about how the premise came together in terms of story and style. And then you mentioned season 2, so when can we expect season 2?
Season 2, there's no official word on that. I mean, we're in the middle of it, and we're figuring out how to make it now under these new circumstances. But I would say maybe sometime in 2021, probably before 2022, but maybe in 2022, but it's happening. We're working on it. So Undone came together because I wanted to work with Kate Purdy, who was a writer on BoJack, and was just someone I really vibed with. And so we just started talking about, if we made a show together, what would that look like? And I think, one of my goals was, I felt like BoJack was like a pretty weird show, but still somewhat accessible. And I wondered, can we go even weirder? Can we do something that is maybe more outside the box of what you consider adult half-hour animation, Western animation? And so that was the kind of the way in for me, is like, what haven't I seen? And one thing is like stories about women. You haven't seen a lot in Western adult animation. The other is stories that are like pretty dramatic, stories that are heavily serialized, stories that are about women having relationships with women, like their sisters and their mothers. Rotoscoped animation, the look of it doesn't feel like other animated shows. So that was kind of the beginning of it for me. And then a lot of it came from Kate's own experiences with her family and mental health, and kind of exploring different diagnoses or explanations for various mental health issues. And that was where that show came from. And if that sounds interesting to you, go check it out.
Thank you. I've got a couple crafts questions, I think, to wrap up. The first one is, in my own experience, I often find that writing dialogue is one of the hardest things to do realistically. How do you go about creating something that gets the point across while still remaining fluid and believable?
That's great. I would say the best way to check if dialogue sounds right is to read it out loud. Is that a lot of times things like as you're writing them feel natural, and then other people go, this dialogue, it doesn't work, or you hear an actor say it and it sounds totally, the syllables, like just the combinations of ways, like you can't make your mouth go from this shape to that shape that quickly, and you've created something that is impossible to say, or just doesn't feel natural. And actually I think that's true of prose as well. I mean, all my stories I read out loud or asked other people to read out loud before I published them, just to kind of, because your mouth kind of makes sense of things and gives you a hint of how other people might read it in their head. So I'd say definitely try saying stuff out loud. And I would say another thing to do is like pay attention to how people talk, and think about when you hear an interesting turn of phrase or interesting grammatical quirk, like make a note of it. Like, oh, that's a fun kind of way for people to say things. I haven't heard that before. That, or the way this person constructs their sentences is very consistent in an interesting way. I think about what your dialogue says about the person saying it. How can you differentiate between your characters through dialogue? Some people, like myself, tend to speak in paragraphs, long run-on sentences. Other people are very succinct. Some people like to use slang. Other people don't. Some people speak with a lot of exclamation points. Other people speak with a lot of questions. So I think that could be helpful to think about, what is your dialogue saying about your character through subtext? And that, if you don't know a way in, that can be a helpful way to craft a character. Julie, do you have any other tips for dialogue?
I mean, that was good. That was really good. I feel like I should have written that down and then,
Yeah.
and then passed it off as my own in a fiction workshop. No, I mean, reading out loud is the thing, right? It's like, I feel like that is like so important, but that was good advice.
And then one more bit of craft, and maybe an apt question for a final question, is how do you figure out how to end a story? I feel as though I struggle the most with endings, whether it's a poem or a story.
Ooh, that's good. I don't know how to end a story. I mean, a lot of times I'll say I often come up with the endings. I usually come up with the beginnings first, then the endings, and then I struggle with the middle. And I'm like, how do I connect these 2 points? Like I come like, oh, that's the moment I want to land on. But if you're just like writing forward, like how do you know when it's over? I'm not sure I know. Julie, do you have an answer for any secrets for tips for endings?
No, I don't. I feel like if you don't know the ending at the beginning, then it's like really hard, or you can find, if you can't find the ending out of the beginning that you wrote in some way, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a weird answer, but I'm surprised that you don't know, because your endings they're all so like punchy and like
they're deliberate.
often
Yeah.
do so like turn at the end.
Yeah, just a little boom, a little kiss at the very end of there's something I think about a lot is the movie Magic Mike. Not the sequel, the original Magic Mike is about a bunch of strippers, and there's not really a love story in it, but there is a girl, and the very last beat of the movie is like a very quick kiss, just like they're just like talking, and she like leans in and like plants one on his mouth, and then like cuts to black. It's like over. Like it's not like a music swelling and pushing into the romantic. It's like a very quick surprise kiss. And I thought, like, that's a great ending that had nothing to do with the movie. But I like endings that feel like there's like a little quick thing at the end. Like maybe you get like a nice beautiful paragraph or a couple paragraphs kind of wrapping things up, and then, by the way, my name's Tom. Like I don't know what that line was, but imagine that meant something. Imagine, by the way, my name's Tom. Like imagine that was like a kicker. Like I think of like endings, like you want your ending to be like a punchline in a sense, or feel like, oh, like, yeah, like you kind of like you're ejected out of the story. That's what I like to do with endings. Like there are other people like to kind of like slowly, drift to an end. I like an end that feels like it's drifting, and then you hit the eject button and you're out. You're like, whoa, what was that? Like I got to read that last line again. That's the kind of ending I like. It's like a little bit of a kiss or a sucker punch right at the end.
That's great. I feel like now someone should say, by the way, my name's Tom, and then we should
By
all
the way, my name's Tom.
Thank you so much.
Here's a good challenge, a good literary challenge. If you need a prompt, come up with a story that ends with, and by the way, my name's Tom, and it's a good story. How do you make that last line be meaningful in some way? I don't know if you can, but I'll bet somebody could.
Oh man, thank you guys both so much. This was so very fun. You can buy Raphael and Julie's books on our website. If you're watching on our YouTube recording, you can buy them in the description below. The links to the donation pages Raphael mentioned will also be below. Please like and subscribe. I say things that YouTubers say now. It's wonderful. Thanks again to both of you. Have a great weekend. Best of luck. Please continue to stay safe so we can continue to enjoy all your wonderful work. Thank you for spending time with our community, and to everybody tuning in from all over the country. We thank you. It's always so weird to end these because I have to say goodbye to all of you at once. It's it. It's like ending a phone call with 30 people. Bye all. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure. Thanks everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, Julie.